Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight we're heading to Taiwan, and I'm going to share a story that still gives me chills every time I think about it. This happened to a university student named Kailun Chen, and what started as just another late night turned into something he'll never forget. Now, if you've spent time in Taiwan, you've probably heard whispers about certain bus routes that run after midnight, routes that aren't supposed to exist but somehow still do. Bus 260 is one of those routes, and trust me, after hearing this story, you'll understand why some journeys are better left untaken. So here's the thing about late-night study sessions. They mess with your head, make you see things that aren't there, hear sounds that don't exist. At least that's what Kailun told himself when this whole thing started. He was a computer engineering student, 21 years old, the kind of guy who lived in hoodies and carried his entire life in a backpack full of textbooks. Always tired, always stressed, always pushing through one more chapter, one more assignment, one more all-nighter. This particular night was no different. It was a Tuesday in late October, and Kailun had been camped out in the university library since early afternoon. The place was his second home, really. Third floor, corner table by the window where he could watch the campus slowly empty out as the hours ticked by. By midnight, the security guard was doing his rounds, flashing his light at the few remaining students still hunched over their books. Kailun packed up his things around 2:30 in the morning. His eyes burned from staring at circuit diagrams and code for the past 10 hours straight. His neck ached from hunching over textbooks, and his stomach growled with that hollow feeling you get when you've survived on nothing but vending machine coffee and convenience store sandwiches. All he wanted was to get back to his dorm, crash into bed, and maybe get a few hours of sleep before his morning lecture. The campus at that hour was like a ghost town. Street lamps cast long shadows across empty walkways, and the only sounds were his footsteps, echoing off the concrete, and the distant hum of air conditioning units. Most students were either fast asleep or still awake in their rooms, probably gaming or cramming for exams. The last train had stopped running over an hour ago, which meant Kailun was looking at a 30-minute walk back to his dorm. He didn't mind walking usually. It helped clear his head after long study sessions, but tonight felt different. There was this thick mist rolling in from the mountains, making everything look soft and blurred around the edges. The air was heavy, almost sticky, and unusually quiet. Even the stray cats that normally prowled the campus were nowhere to be seen. Kailun pulled his hood up and adjusted his backpack straps. The weight of his textbooks felt heavier than usual. He was about halfway to the main gate when he heard it, the low rumble of an engine approaching from behind. He turned around, expecting to see maybe a taxi or a late-night delivery truck, but what he saw made him stop in his tracks. It was a bus, a city bus, pulling up to the stop right beside him with a soft hiss of air brakes. The destination board on the front read 260 in dim orange letters. In smaller text, it simply said final stop. No route details, no specific destination, just those two words glowing in the misty darkness. Now, Kailun had been taking public transport in this city his entire life. He knew every bus route, every schedule, every shortcut. Bus 260 wasn't supposed to exist. There was no 260 route in the city's official system. He'd never seen this number before, not on any timetable or route map, but here it was, idling at the stop like it belonged there. The doors opened with a mechanical wheeze, and warm air drifted out, carrying with it the smell of old fabric and something else. Something he couldn't quite identify. It wasn't unpleasant exactly, but it was different, stale maybe, like air that had been sitting in a closed room for too long. For a moment, Kailun just stood there, staring at the open doors. His logical mind was telling him to keep walking, to stick to his original plan of walking back to the dorm. This was probably some kind of mistake, maybe a bus that had gotten lost or was being moved between depots, but his tired body was telling him something else entirely. 30 minutes of walking in this thick mist with his heavy backpack and aching shoulders versus a warm, dry bus ride that would probably get him closer to his destination. The driver was sitting perfectly still behind the wheel, face obscured by shadows. He didn't look at Kai Lun, didn't acknowledge him at all, just sat there, waiting, hands on the steering wheel, like he had all the time in the world. Kai Lun glanced around the empty street, then back at the bus. The doors were still open, still waiting. After another moment of hesitation, he stepped forward and climbed aboard. The moment his foot hit the first step, he felt it, a strange chill that seemed to come from inside the bus itself, not from the October air outside. The lighting was dim, much dimmer than normal city buses. Old fluorescent tubes flickered overhead, casting everything in that sickly yellow-green glow that made his skin look pale and unhealthy. The seats were covered in worn fabric, dark blue or maybe green. It was hard to tell in that light. Kai Lun fumbled for change in his pocket, but the driver still didn't acknowledge him, didn't ask for fare, didn't even turn around. Just sat there, motionless, while the bus doors closed behind Kai Lun with a soft thud that seemed to echo longer than it should have. The interior was eerily quiet, no engine noise, no road sounds, no electronic beeps or announcements, just silence, thick and heavy like the mist outside. Kai Lun made his way toward the back, his footsteps muffled by the rubber flooring. He chose a seat about halfway down the aisle, near a window where he could keep an eye on the route and make sure he didn't miss his stop. As the bus pulled away from the curb, Kai Lun settled into his seat and tried to shake off the weird feeling that had been growing in his chest since he'd stepped aboard. It was probably just fatigue, he told himself. Too many late nights, too much caffeine, too much stress. His mind was playing tricks on him, making everything seem more ominous than it actually was. But as they drove through the empty streets, that feeling only got stronger. The bus was moving slowly, much slower than normal city buses. And the route, well, it didn't seem to follow any logical path. They were heading away from the university district, away from the main residential areas where most students lived. Instead, they were winding through older parts of the city, neighborhoods that Kai Lun rarely visited, streets lined with traditional shophouses and narrow alleys that disappeared into darkness. The mist outside was getting thicker, pressing against the windows like something alive. Street lamps appeared and disappeared in the haze, their light diffused and strange. Kai Lun tried to get his bearings, to figure out where they were going, but nothing looked familiar. Every turn seemed to take them deeper into parts of the city he'd never seen before. That's when he noticed the woman. She had gotten on at a stop he hadn't even realized they'd made. One moment the bus was empty except for him and the silent driver, and the next moment she was there, sitting 3 rows behind him, perfectly still in the dim light. Kai Lun hadn't heard the doors open, hadn't heard her footsteps or the sound of her sitting down. She was just there, like she'd always been there. She was middle-aged, maybe in her 50s, wearing a dark coat that seemed to blend into the shadows of the bus. Her hair was pulled back severely and her hands were folded neatly in her lap. But what struck Kai Lun most was how still she was, completely motionless, not even the slight swaying that passengers usually do when a bus turns or stops. She sat like a statue, staring straight ahead, and Kai Lun couldn't tell if she was even breathing. He tried to focus on the view outside, on figuring out where they were going, but his eyes kept drifting back to her reflection in the window. Something about her presence made the air in the bus feel even colder, even more oppressive, and then he started hearing them, the whispers. At first, he thought it might be the woman talking to herself, maybe mumbling something under her breath. But as he listened more carefully, he realized the sounds were coming from behind him. From the back of the bus where no one was sitting, soft, muffled voices like people having a conversation in another room. He couldn't make out any words, just the rhythm of speech, the rise and fall of sentences that seemed to fade in and out with the bus's movement. Kai Lun turned around to look, his heart starting to pound in his chest. The back of the bus was empty, just rows of vacant seats disappearing into shadow, but the whispers continued, and now they seemed to be coming from all around him, from the walls themselves, from the very air inside the bus. He tried to convince himself it was just the air conditioning system, maybe old pipes rattling in the walls, but deep down he knew that wasn't it. These weren't mechanical sounds. They were voices, human voices, and they were getting clearer. Kai Lun pulled out his phone, hoping to distract himself with something normal, something real. But the screen showed no signal bars, no network connection at all. The time display read 3:17 a.m., which didn't make sense. He'd only been on the bus for maybe 10 minutes, 15 at most. How had so much time passed? The whispers were becoming more distinct now. He could make out fragments of conversations, words in Mandarin and Taiwanese that seemed to drift in and out of focus. Someone was talking about being late for work. Another voice mentioned missing a doctor's appointment. Normal, everyday concerns that somehow felt wrong coming from the empty darkness behind him. The woman in the dark coat hadn't moved a muscle, not once. Kai Lun watched her reflection in the window, and she remained perfectly still, like a photograph. Her eyes never blinked. Her chest didn't rise and fall. It was as if she wasn't breathing at all. The bus made another turn, and Kai Lun realized they were now in a part of the city he'd never seen before. The buildings outside looked older, much older. Traditional architecture mixed with structures that seemed to belong to no particular era. Everything was shrouded in that thick mist, making it impossible to get a clear view of anything. More passengers had appeared without him noticing. An elderly man near the front, wearing clothes that looked like they belonged to the 1980s. A young woman clutching a purse, her hair styled in a way that seemed decades out of date. A teenage boy in a school uniform that Kai Lun didn't recognize from any local school. None of them had gotten on at stops. None of them had paid fares. They were just there, filling the bus one by one, all sitting in perfect silence, all staring straight ahead with the same empty expression. The temperature inside the bus was dropping. Kai Lun could see his breath now, small puffs of vapor that disappeared quickly in the stale air. His fingers were starting to go numb, and he pulled his hoodie tighter around himself. But the cold wasn't just physical. It was something deeper, something that seemed to seep into his bones and settle there. The whispers had become a constant murmur now, overlapping voices that created a sound like distant ocean waves. Kai Lun caught fragments here and there, someone crying about a missed opportunity, another voice apologizing for something they'd never gotten to say. All of it floating around him in the dim light of the bus, creating an atmosphere that felt more like a dream than reality. He needed to get off. Every instinct in his body was screaming at him to get off this bus, to get away from these silent passengers and their impossible presence. But when he looked outside, all he could see was mist and darkness. No recognizable landmarks, no street signs, no indication of where they were or where they were going. Kai Lun stood up on shaky legs and made his way toward the front of the bus. His footsteps echoed strangely in the enclosed space, and none of the other passengers acknowledged him as he passed. They remained frozen in their seats, like mannequins arranged for some disturbing display. When he reached the driver, Kai Lun cleared his throat nervously. "Excuse me," he said, his voice sounding smaller than he'd intended. "Where exactly are we going?" The driver's hands remained motionless on the steering wheel. For a long moment, he didn't respond at all. Then, slowly, his eyes met Kai Lun's in the rearview mirror. They were dark eyes, deeper than they should have been, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of something ancient and tired. "You're lucky you spoke up," the driver said quietly. The others didn't. A chill ran down Kai Lun's spine that had nothing to do with the cold air. "What do you mean? What others?" The driver's gaze shifted to the passengers behind them. They rode in silence, accepted their journey without question, and now they ride forever. Kailun turned to look at the other passengers, and for the first time since he'd gotten on the bus, one of them looked back at him. The elderly man near the front turned his head slowly, and his eyes held a sadness so profound it was almost unbearable to witness. His mouth moved as if he were trying to speak, but no sound came out. "I want to get off," Kailun whispered, his voice barely audible over the constant murmur of whispers. The driver nodded once. "Because you asked, I can let you off, but remember this journey. Remember what you've seen. Some paths are meant to be warnings, not destinations." The bus began to slow, and through the mist, Kailun could see lights ahead. Real lights, the familiar glow of street lamps and convenience stores. As they pulled up to a stop that looked blessedly normal, the doors opened with that same mechanical wheeze. Kailun practically ran off the bus, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. The moment his feet hit the pavement, he turned around to look back, but the bus was already pulling away. As it disappeared into the mist, he caught one last glimpse of the passengers inside, all of them turned toward the windows, all of them watching him with those same sad, empty eyes. He stood there for several minutes, shaking from more than just the cold, trying to process what had just happened. When he finally checked his phone, he had full signal again, and the time showed 2:52 a.m. Somehow, he was only a few blocks from his dorm, closer than he should have been if he'd walked the entire way. Kailun never told anyone about that night who would believe him, but sometimes, late at night when he's walking home from the library, he sees other buses with unfamiliar route numbers, and he always chooses to walk instead. The thing about some journeys is that they're not really about getting from one place to another. Sometimes they're about showing you something you were never meant to see, reminding you that the world is stranger and sadder than we pretend it is during daylight hours. So the next time you're waiting for a late-night bus and one pulls up with a number you don't recognize, maybe think twice before getting on, because some rides don't have destinations, and some passengers never reach their final stop. Thanks for joining me tonight for this chilling tale from Taiwan. Let me know in the comments what you think really happened to Kailun on that misty October night. Was it just exhaustion playing tricks on his mind, or did he stumble into something far more mysterious? And if you've ever had your own strange encounter on public transport, I'd love to hear about it.